Well, great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm sure more people will be joining us as we go along. But my name is Luke Metzger. I'm the executive director of Environment Texas. We're a nonprofit research and advocacy organization based in Austin. And we're part of the Alliance for a Clean Texas, which is a coalition of dozens of environmental conservation, consumer, faith, and other groups focused on policy at the Texas Legislature around protecting clean air and water and open spaces and other important environmental attributes. And, we have really just the last few months started to take a close look at the issue of data centers, and of which Texas has had data centers for many years now, but not of the sort that we're seeing now. The newer data centers built to train or run AI models are much more energy and water intensive than the data centers of yore. And we're seeing just so many more of them as well, and just the scale of hundreds of additional data centers coming to Texas is alarming when you look at it from a natural resources perspective. Right now, the University of Texas estimates that data centers use less than 1% of the state's water, but that could grow to as much as 9% of the state's water. And when the Water Development Board tells us that we might not have enough water as it is during a record drought, that's real concerning for drinking water as well as just the water that our rivers and aquifers need to support wildlife. We also know that there's these data centers are incredibly hungry for energy, and that raises concerns both for the reliability of our electric grid, but also about what kind of power is going to be required to run these data centers. Much of which is likely going to be very polluting, and then on and on. There's a number of concerns, whether it's where some of these data centers are being located, including right next to state parks, or the noise. And so, as a result of a lot of these concerns, we decided at the Alliance for Clean Texas to convene this data center week of action to help educate some of our members and the public at large about what we know about the truth and the myths around data centers, and what's the real story about their impacts. And then also to help train on skills of advocacy and organizing, like how do you lobby a legislator effectively? How do you get your message out on the internet? And so this week of action is going to combine those uh, issue briefings, skills trainings, and then coordinated actions where we're asking all of y'all to join in with us as we call on the legislature and the governor to take action. And that includes, I think our groups now are at the point where we think a special session of the legislature is necessary, and we're hoping the governor will convene one because time is of the essence when it comes to policy related to data centers. We can't wait till dozens more are built and that are then grandfathered in for some of the badly needed policy. So this week we're going to cover each night of our web briefings. We're going to cover a different issue related to data centers, including tonight, where we're looking at the tax and budget impacts related to data centers. On Tuesday, we're going to look about the water and land concerns with data centers. On Wednesday, we're looking at the air and electric grid impacts. And then on Thursday, a special webinar looking at how do you, for folks who are engaged in the permitting process around data centers, how do you successfully advocate at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for as strong a permits as possible related to some of these data centers. And then we'll have trainings as well. Tonight's training is going to look at how do you effectively deliver testimony at the legislature, and how do you lobby a member to have the greatest impact. So we've got a great set of panelists joining us tonight, and I think we're going to hear a presentation from each. Then we'll open up for Q&A. Please use the Q&A box, and Kaiba is going to help monitor that and steer questions to panelists. And we'll be done about 7 o'clock tonight. So our first panelist is we're excited to welcome Commissioner Chip Joslin from Somerville County, who's been active on some of the concerns around data centers, including around state parks and other impacts to Texas, to talk specifically around both what some of those impacts are, what you're seeing at the local level, as well as the tax and budget impacts. What counties are being asked to do in terms of tax incentive deals and economic development deals, as well as then what constituents can do to help intervene or engage in that process. Let's happy to welcome Commissioner Joslin.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and thank you guys for all that you do in helping the state. We're in an invasion right now, especially in Somerville County, and from all my conversations and all my research all over the state, and I knew it was coming. I said it was coming. A lot of people said I was crazy for saying it was coming. But we're the second smallest county geographically in the state of Texas, and we have one of those parks that you mentioned. And last year, when I found out randomly that Encore was having a meeting with 765 kilovolt power lines, and I was like, okay, well, I need to be there. It's a county over, but they didn't have one here. But I need to be there because the dyno switch starts in Somerville. And I know I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but all these energy issues are tied together. So of course, right by the dyno switch, we have Comanche Peak Nuclear Power Plant. One of the routes that I found after waiting outside in the sun for an hour and a half to get into this building that was way too small for the people that wanted to come and see what was going on, finally made it in, and it was super crowded in there as well. All the information that I wanted to bring back to our constituents, they wouldn't give me copies of it. They gave me a map that you could barely read with some very basic bad information on it, in my opinion. So after I finally figured out where one of the routes were, it, like you said, it was literally going around a fence line on our state park and down in front of the entrance where you actually have to pass through it to get to the park. I knew that was coming. That they're still in, as you know, they're still in the hearings currently. But one of the issues is at the same time, Amazon, they were starting to court Hood County to try to get them to allow them to put up a data center there. And they're talking about putting 21 data centers up in Hood County. And our land was not as desirable in Somerville County right by the power plant. So there's only 17 that could go there. But if you're looking at, $1 to $2 billion value, right? I mean, you're looking at possibly up to $34 or $37 billion of data centers just on the Somerville County side. So I don't think people understand the magnitude of how big these are. Obviously, water is a huge concern for me. We don't know what we don't know. We've never had $34 billion worth of data centers in Somerville County. And so, I introduced on agenda item to do a moratorium that got shot down. I think maybe the word was too strong for them, but now the current word is pause. Let's take a pause. And that's all I'm asking. And that's what I know a lot of people want. A lot of constituents want. Anytime anything in Hood County or Somerville County comes up regarding the data center, it's standing room only. I mean, people really care about this issue, and we haven't seen that in years and years. So um, AWS, I'm sad to report, actually was passed by our court 3-2, and so they break ground next month. So they're using water out of and you know they said they'll only use a small percentage, 1.7% or something, but it's out of Squaw Creek Reservoir, which that water is used to cool the nuclear power plant here. They're also using, I don't know how these data centers are going to be energy or water positive, like I keep hearing, but what I do know is they're taking one entire reactor off of the grid. So roughly 1 million homes are currently, you know, in need of that power. And so if you're taking one of those off the grid, how does that help the grid? Um, if they build the other ones in Hood County, well, it's on Comanche Peak Nuclear Power Plant. So where are they going to get their energy? Well, naturally, they're going to get it from the other, what they call behind the meter, the other reactor, right? So that's what we're currently dealing with right now. That is under contract. And when you talk about abatements and what that looks like, well, we actually did a 381 agreement, which is a rebate. And the reason that was done, and I understand why the court went that direction in lieu of a straight abatement, because what they do is they pay a very nominal fee up front, uh, 90 days after they break ground, and this is all public record, and it should be talked about. But their Amazon is giving us a whopping $2.5 million. That's nothing. That's a small fraction of what's probably going to be needed when you look at extra services when it comes to fire and rescue, and potentially more sheriffs, because we're roughly 10, 11,000 population. When you put in 50% more for the construction, population wise, where do these people go? How do we house them? How do we feed these people? So, traffic wise, where do they go? We have very small county roads that are not rated for any type of this industry, but yet here we are. And, one of the things that I was asked to talk about was our authority. Well, our authority in keeping them out is almost zero. The minimal authority that we have is when we get them under contract, like this particular court did, my court did, with this 381 agreement. You can put measures in there like sound abatements. Ours is not to go over 65 decibels. So we don't have anything to do with the water because, like I said, they're getting that from Vistra. We don't have anything to do with the property. They're getting that from Vistra. And we don't have anything to do with the energy. Again, they're getting that from Vistra. So there's not a lot we could have done to keep them out of here. But if we wouldn't have given them the 381 abatement, then, which again I think is a bad deal. I think we could have done a much better deal as far as negotiations, but we have what we have, and sadly, as one of the no votes, it's 100% in my precinct. So I'm getting all the calls. I'm getting all the calls on the surveyors. I'm getting all the calls on the traffic. I'm getting calls about all of it. So in addition to budget season and everything else we're dealing with right now, this is just one more issue. As far as how the people can engage, I've been incredibly impressed. We have Protect the Paluxy Valley Inc. here. I don't know if or it's LLC actually. So they're all over social media. They have been incredible. I have so many friends and so much support here. Obviously, you guys, Public Citizen. I mean, there's been a lot of people that have helped us and to help me. I mean, I was listening to someone say that, you know, if we're stuck in the barn having to deal with roads all the time, we don't even have time to deal with these types of issues. And you know, fortunately, we have and we do, and we have friends that have helped with research, and we've had friends that have helped. I mean, you know, the Protect the Plexi folks. I mean, they take buses, they rent buses for people up here that can't afford to go down to Austin, or maybe they just don't want to drive to Austin or can't drive to Austin. And so, I mean, they've been incredible in helping us and holding us accountable. They hold our county officials and our city officials, they in neighboring counties, they hold them accountable too. So what can citizens do? I would say can continue to do that. Can continue to hold them accountable. I know you guys are going to get into it later, but when I went down to testify with the Natural Resource Committee, when was that now? Who knows when was that? About a month ago now,
Around
give or
that,
take.
around then,
June
yeah.
23rd, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just, you know, one of the things that I noticed is that that, you know, when the legislators were being screamed at, you know, and it's a and I understand people are losing their family homes, they're losing their heritage. I understand why people are upset, but I watch them and they seem to be way more receptive when you just laid out some facts, and when you let them know, you know, your honest feelings, and and uh and some of them were even talking about, I believe it was Chairman Harris was asking the big four or five that were there how they felt about the counties getting more authority and getting more regulation. And it was the gentleman from AWS. I forget his name, but he said, "Well, that's the way it is in every other state, right?" So I don't know why it's not like that here. I mean, you know, we're put in office to help protect our citizens, to help protect our resources, and you know, we should have that opportunity. We should have the ability to protect them. And we just don't right now. All of that is at a state level. So it's good to hear them talking about it and other people on the panel. Our House Representative, Helen Kerwin, was amazing. She wasn't actually on that committee, but it means so much to her. She asked if she could be, and she could sit in on that committee, and the chair granted her that opportunity, and she asked hard questions, and it was a long day. Many of us, you know, for me, because I drove there and back, and it ended up being, you know, roughly a 20-hour day, but it's worth it. You know, the sacrifice is worth it. And we have on the horizon, we have Black Mountain that again butts right up next to the park on the lands that they've already procured. And you know, like I said earlier, we don't know what we don't know. So what happens? What happens with that runoff? What happens with the power plants that it's going to take to actually fuel those particular data centers? They're not going to get their power from Comanche Peak. They're not going to get their power from the nuclear power plant. So they're going to have to build power plants. Well, we talk about the usage of water by these data centers. Well, it pales in comparison to what the power plants to power the data centers. The pollution as well. I mean, how many metric tons of pollution are going to be going up in our air? Where we already have many power plants around us. And one of the issues that I personally have had with even TCEQ is they don't really look at things cumulative. They look at the power plants to, from my opinion, they look at the power plants individually. And when I say they're not looking at cumulative studies, it's mainly where they look at our air and where they look at our air quality is 6 counties away, and it's been broken for about 3 years now. And so now they're actually looking at our air quality, testing our air quality out of Dallas, Texas, which what does that have to do with Somerville and Hood County? Absolutely nothing. So anyway, those are my 2 cents. I don't want to ramble anymore, so I think I've done my job
That
of
was
rambling.
terrific. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I know you have to head out for another engagement, but I just had
Yeah.
one question, and then Kaiba, I don't know
Yes.
if you want to pull any from the Q&A, but so counties have limited authority. One thing you can do is around the 381 agreement. I'm curious if the county had denied that agreement, what do you, in your opinion, would AWS have come anyway? Like how big of a deal is that as a 381 or a tax abatement?
Well, that's a tough call. I can tell you what they told me. They told me they would not. My gut is they would have come, but what that looks like from a fiscal point of view. And again, no one knows about these because they're all new, right? So from a fiscal point of view, if we gave them no abatement and there's no way to regulate the sound and we have the real quick we have that in the contract. We have the 65 decibels in the contract. Okay, so what happens if they violate that? What do we do? I mean, we can't do anything. We don't have anyone on staff that can actually read those findings, right? And if we do, we don't have anyone that is knows how to even calibrate a decibel reader. So I watched this play out in Hood County, and this was Marathon, the Bitcoin. Their lawyers ate them up, and won. And that's the same thing that would happen if we got into a legal fight with Amazon. I mean, we have thousands of dollars and they have trillions. So, any reasonable person can see that we're not going to win that battle. But back to the abatement. So if we didn't give them any abatement right now, probably 75 to 80% of our tax base is Vistra. It's Comanche Peak Nuclear Power Plant. So it would greatly reduce all of their taxes. And as a citizen, it would also reduce our taxes. So we're in the 31, 32 cent range. That's where we'll be again this year per hundred valuation. And let's just say it drops the citizens' tax rate down significantly to 10, 15 cents, maybe cut it in half, right? So, I mean, I would love to own my house outright someday. I would love my ad valorem taxes to be greatly reduced. But what happens if we cut it in half and AWS goes belly up, or technology comes out to where they don't need the facility here? They can put the facility in a closet in the Metroplex, or whatever, and we no longer have that tax base here anymore. Well, what happens, with the 3.5 cents on the tax rate, and they want to bring it down to 2 and 1 and talk about eliminating it. How do we actually support our county? How do we pay our bills? And so if it goes away, I mean, there's potential of totally crippling not just Somerville County, but other counties financially. So did I come close to answering your question?
You sure did. Yeah. Thank you. That
Okay.
was really great.
All right.
We really
All right.
appreciate you joining. We'll let you get
Yeah.
to your dinner. And yeah, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Right. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me.
You
And,
bet.
and keep up the great work.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Uh, Now we're going to turn from local tax and budget policy and impacts to the state level. And to speak to that, our next speaker is Shannon Holbrook, who's the director of Invest in Texas for Every Texan, where he oversees fiscal policy research and advocacy. Shannon?
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it, and thank you all for having me. It's really great to be able to talk to you about this topic. Luke alluded earlier to the fact that they had to get up to speed on this stuff pretty quickly, and we've had to do that too. So we've been cramming a lot of learning into these past few months. So if I should I share my screen, or Kaiba, can you do the slides? I have a slide deck, and I'm going to probably skip through it pretty quickly so we can stick to time here. Sure. So, as Luke said, I'm with an organization called Every Texan. We're about 40 years old, and for that time, we've been advocating at the state level for better. Well, we're a policy research and advocacy organization advocating for better equity and opportunity for all Texans across the state. And we work most extensively in sort of public education and higher education, healthcare, and budget and taxes. And that's where kind of we come into the debate around data centers. I think, are not going to get so much involved in all the conversations around water usage, electricity, all that kind of thing. We're really kind of sticking to our lane as far as this goes and letting our partners who know more about that stuff, take the lead in some of those other policy areas. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the tax and budget stuff. Like I said, I'm gonna try and go quickly through here. Here's the agenda, just real quick. I'm just gonna show you a couple charts on the state budget and the tax system to give you a sense of the scope of our state budget and tax system. Not sure how much y'all know on this topic, so I just want to lay some groundwork there. We'll talk a little bit about data centers in Texas, why there's so many data centers here, and then we'll talk about some of the recent developments, and we'll also spend a couple minutes looking at other states because that is a really valid thing to be talking about here when, Texas has these exemptions, these incentives for data centers, and there's a debate about how much that matters. Well, what other states are doing also matters because it's sort of this competitive race, right? So anyway, and then I'm going to give you a slide just of what I'm intending to say tomorrow at the Senate Finance Committee hearing, and then hopefully we'll have time for just a few questions. So let's move along. So, as I said, we're Every Texan. These are the main areas that we work on. Another thing that's sort of a newer area for us that we've covered a bunch in the last couple sessions is preemption and local control, which really comes up in this debate. As the commissioner was just talking about, this sort of like this debate or this kind of jockeying that goes on between the state government and county governments and city governments, and everybody's trying to like figure out what their responsibilities and what their authority is. We're kind of getting involved in a little bit in that too. So that's something I'm going to try and mention in my testimony tomorrow. Okay, so I'm just going to give you like a really brief overview of the state budget next. Again, just to kind of set the stage, any presentation on the state budget would be incomplete without this. I should get a tattoo of this pie chart somewhere on my body. But anyway, this is kind of how it breaks down. We're currently in the 2026 and 27 state budget, and the total of that is about $338 billion. In Texas, we do have a biennial budget. The legislature meets every 2 years in odd numbered years, and they write a budget for the next biennium, the next 2 year fiscal period. The big stuff in the budget is health and human services. Most of that is Medicaid funding. And then public education is about $99 billion. Higher ed is under that, about 34. Okay, next slide. This is just another way to kind of break down how the budget looks, where the money goes. As you can see, Medicaid, big one. Foundation School Program is the main funding source for our formula funding for our K through 12 public schools. And so, that's obviously one of the big things too. TxDOT, is another big piece. That's roads and highways. Okay, next slide. This is going to be okay. This is a timeline. I'm going to skip this, I think. But I will, I guess use it to raise the point that, obviously there's a lot of advocacy to be done during the legislative session, which starts in January, as y'all know. But there's also a lot of advocacy to be done before the session starts, and especially on the budget side. The legislature and the legislative budget board are going to be starting to have their budget hearings where they go over the appropriations requests from state agencies sometime late summer, early fall. Probably be early fall this year because I think we're running a little bit behind schedule. And so that's a really good opportunity too to show up and testify if there's stuff you want to advocate for in the budget. Okay, and then next slide. So, as I said, we're an advocacy organization. We talk a lot about the things that are not in the state budget as well as the things that are. For us, some of these big ones that we tend to return to year after year at the Ledge are Medicaid expansion. We advocate for that continually. A basic allotment increase for our public schools. I mean, we are of the opinion that our public schools are chronically underfunded, like a lot of state services, and increasing the basic allotment, which is kind of like the foundational per student funding amount in our formulas, is the simplest way to simply just raise the bar for everybody, raise the water level for everybody in terms of funding, and to just make sure that our schools have a little bit closer to what they need to educate our kids. Okay, next slide. So these are some perennial concerns. I'll skip these, but basically this gets back to the theme of the fact that the legislature basically doesn't spend enough money on the things that we feel like they should be spending money on. Now, a big concern going into next session, and this is relevant here, is revenue. So the last couple of sessions, we've had really big carryover balances, or you may have heard them referred to as surpluses. I don't like to use that term for a few reasons, but that was kind of basically it meant that the legislature had more money than they thought they were going to have to put into the budget. So it was kind of an easier process for them to write the budget. It's always easier when you have more money than when you don't have enough. Um, so the reason for those surpluses is complicated, but it really has to do with the fact that we had such big inflation coming out of COVID. Sales tax revenues were much higher than folks had anticipated, and so that's why we had those big carryover balances. Those are pretty much gone. We're probably going to have around a $4.5 billion surplus or carryover balance going into the next legislative session. But we also think there's going to be probably a $4 billion or so dollar Medicaid shortfall that will have to be covered in the supplemental appropriations bill. Essentially, what that means is like we're not going to have nearly as much money as we've gotten used to having these last couple sessions. Now, the legislature took the opportunity when they had those big surpluses to pass really huge property tax cut bills in both 2023 and 2025. The amount of total property tax cuts just from cuts since 2019, the amount in this budget alone is about $51 billion. And they're also talking about doing more property tax cuts next session. Now, I'm trying to be optimistic given the revenue picture as it's developing. I'm hoping that like this is all these ideas you hear kicked around. Oh, we should just eliminate property taxes entirely or eliminate them for schools. I'm hoping those conversations will not go very far just because of what we're looking at in terms of revenue, but you never really know. There's also federal funding cuts. If y'all have been following, what's been going on at the federal level, obviously there's been a lot of stuff that's come down since HR 1 was passed, the big, beautiful bill, whatever, last summer, cut a lot of funding that goes to states, and that means that the states are having to figure out how to make up for those funding cuts. SNAP is a good example of this. So they kind of changed the structure of the SNAP program in that bill, which means essentially states have to pay more to fund SNAP. So that's going to be an issue we have to talk about next session. And we also have a lot of local revenue and budget troubles. If you've been paying attention to how local schools are doing, they're probably not doing well. Our cities and counties also not doing well. They've had to deal with the same inflation that we've all had to deal with, and sometimes more. Asphalt has gone up a lot more than general price inflation. Fire trucks are more expensive, that sort of thing. Road maintenance, but their tax revenue is limited. There's a ton of state laws in place that really prevent localities from raising taxes beyond a certain threshold without having an election and all sorts of stuff. So we're having those pressures at the local government level as well. Okay, so I think let's move forward. Okay, this is the carryover balance, as I mentioned. That's pretty much going to be over. Let's move forward a little bit and start talking about data centers. Um, tax revenue. Skip to the next one, please, because I do want to make the point here. If you look at our state tax revenue in 2025, this is a 1 year amount, it's about $84 billion. The sales tax represents about 60% or just under 60% of all state source revenue. That makes a difference. There's some issues with that, with respect to volatility. When the economy's down, sales tax revenue also goes down. So that means the state has less money from this big chunk of its income. And then there are also fairness concerns because, as we say, the state, the sales tax is regressive, meaning lower income folks pay a higher percentage of their income in the sales tax than wealthier people do. So there's a fairness issue there. But anyway, remember the importance of the sales tax for our state budget. Okay, so now I think let's move on. Oh, good. Data centers, finally. So, um, so the next slide. Okay, so we all know there's a ton of data centers in Texas. The Tribune had an article a while, pretty recently, putting the count at about 334 currently operating data centers and about 248 more under development. I've seen much higher numbers than that as well. I think it's one of those things depends on what your source is to sort of figure out how many data centers we have. The point is we have the second highest number of data centers in the country, second to Virginia, which has about 600 or 700. And the data centers there have become a real problem. And obviously they're starting to become a problem here too. Texas is attractive to data center developers because we have cheap land, cheap power. We're a business-friendly state with little regulation, and we also have these tax breaks that we've been talking a little bit about. Okay, next slide. So you hear from data center supporters, one of the biggest arguments you hear, and the commissioner alluded to this as well, that when a data center moves into your community, the tax base goes up so much because it's raising property value so much that they can lower taxes for everybody else. And wow, isn't that great? There are a lot of issues with that that I would sort of push back on, but the commissioner sort of covered some of that stuff. They also say that the increased power demand from data centers actually induces supply, and there's kind of this economic cycle that's again, it's sort of like it may work in an Econ 101 sense, but when it comes to the real world, that's sort of a difficult argument. And there are other arguments as well. There are a lot more issues with data centers, however, as we all know. That's on the next slide. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the power grid. The number of data centers that ERCOT is expecting to come online just in the next few years is staggering. I mean, the sort of momentary demand on the grid tends to peak out around 91. I think that was a record that we just broke, 91 gigawatts of power demand. ERCOT has received applications for about 220 gigawatts to add on to the grid, with 70% of that represented by data center demand. Now, some of this it's all kind of like tricky to understand because a lot of these applications that people have put in or companies have put in for what are probably data centers could be speculative. So we don't really know exactly like how many data centers are likely to actually get built versus not. But that's part of the problem here, right? Is it's just not this kind of transparency that we would like to see around the issue. It also, I mean, when you have this kind of demand added to the grid without, somebody being able to snap their fingers and magically add all this supply that would require, that means prices go up. And we've seen that a lot, and particularly in the PJM region, which is the sort of like kind of northeastern interconnection region that includes Ohio, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And because of all the data centers that we've had pop up in Virginia, electricity prices have dramatically increased for ratepayers in those states. High water usage, obviously, that was about 25 billion gallons in 2025, and HARC, the Houston Advanced Research Center, has estimated that could go up to as much as 161 billion gallons of water annually by 2030. Data centers produce few permanent jobs. There are a lot of construction jobs, obviously, to build the things. But after that's over, there's pretty much a skeleton crew that runs data centers. So there's not a lot of permanent jobs created. So this argument that they really, add to the economic vitality of a community is a little bit thin. Also, pollution, noise, and environmental justice as well. That's something we're still kind of studying. We're trying to figure out what the data says on that question of like where data centers go and do they go in environmental justice communities or communities, low-income communities where they're already sort of distressed environmentally, distressed economically, and that's the last place that we should be putting these dirty places, these dirty data centers. Okay, next slide. So all these issues, the huge increase in data center development that we've seen in Texas just in the past few years has led to a significant backlash. We're seeing it here in Texas, and we're seeing it all around the country. Next slide. This covers some of the yeah, so a couple polls, Texas Politics Project poll at UT found that 56% of Texans and 62% of rural Texans oppose data centers in their communities. That's pretty much in line with what we see at the national level polling wise. And then we've also here's some examples of some local fights. And this is kind of interesting because it gets to what the commissioner was talking about as well, this sort of question of who has the authority to regulate data centers or to sort of figure out like how they can be controlled, how communities can kind of rein in a data center. Like even if a data center shows up, what can a community do to make sure that they're basically being good neighbors? And so we've had several instances where, in Taylor, they tried to submit a ballot initiative to put a ban of data centers on the ballot. But city officials say they can't do that because it violates state law. We've had a couple counties that have tried to do moratoria. That those were struck down, or in one case, the company sued Hill County for $100 million to make sure that the data center project was allowed to go through. Excuse me, San Marcos has banned data centers using its municipal zoning authority, and this is something that cities I think should be allowed to do authority wise. And as mentioned, counties have less authority to do this sort of stuff, this regulation at the local level than cities do with their land use codes and whatnot. But Senator Betancourt has popped up and vowed to fight that ban that San Marcos has put into place. Senator Betancourt is a big player in this debate. He's the chair of the Senate Local Government Committee. He's a big player in preemption debates. He often pops up in news stories when there's this conflict or this debate around what local governments can do. He often will come in and say, "Well, they can't do that because I say so," or the state says so. I mean, next slide. So let's talk very briefly about the state sales tax exemption. This is going to be one of the main things that we'll be talking about tomorrow in the hearing in Senate Finance. And this is sort of, obviously with all the other issues flying around about data centers, this is a pretty limited one. But that means it's kind of easy for us to go and talk about tomorrow and try and stick to this topic. So in Texas, as in a lot of other states, as we'll see in a minute, equipment and electricity purchased for data centers is state sales tax exempt. So we have the 6.25% state sales tax, as y'all know, in Texas. Like I said, that covers about 60% of state source revenue. That's where that revenue comes from. But when a data center buys electricity, or when it buys cooling equipment, or servers, or server racks, or backup power generators, all that stuff is exempt from the state sales tax as long as they're a qualifying data center. And what does that mean, a qualifying data center? Well, there are certain categories for eligibility for data centers to be able to take advantage of this exemption. The law kind of is broken out into two categories. There's regular data centers, I don't call them medium data centers, and then large data centers. They have slightly different qualifications in terms of the size of the facility, the amount of investment, and the number of jobs that they create. Again, as you can see, the number of jobs piece is actually it's pretty low. It's a pretty small number of jobs for the level of investment that we're talking about, and for the footprint and for the impact that a data center has on a community. For some non-large data centers, the facilities do still have to pay that 2% sales tax for the local sales tax, but large data centers do not have to pay. That's exempt for them as well. And the exemption can last for up to 10 or 15 years, depending on the level of investment in the data center facility. So this next slide, please. So this exemption was instituted by the legislature in 2013, and it started going in 2014. The first year, it cost the state about $14.6 million with an M. The current cost of the state budget is about $1 billion each year with a B right now, and is projected to go up to about $1.5 billion just in the next couple of years. So for the 2028 and 29 biennium, which is what legislators are going to be looking at when they write the budget this coming session, they're looking at about a $3.3 billion estimated cost of that exemption. We've also seen from other states, and I think this sort of holds true, and this debate comes up a lot when we talk about tax exemptions, tax incentives generally for economic development. It's controversial. There's not a lot of great data on it, so both sides kind of talk past each other in this debate. But the data seems to really suggest, for the most part, that a lot of times incentives are not really necessary for getting a business or a project to locate in a place. Georgia also has a lot of data centers, and they also have a very costly state sales tax exemption of over $1 billion. Their state auditor found that about 70% of their data center projects that they had currently operating didn't need the subsidies, would have located in Georgia anyway without them. Okay, next slide. So this is there's a link here, and I assume these slides are going to go around, but there's a link here to the comptroller's page on their website. The state comptroller is the one who runs this. They administer this sales tax exemption. They take the application materials from data centers. They determine eligibility, all that sort of stuff. And there is some pretty there's a couple good lists on the comptroller's website of all the data centers that are currently eligible for these exemptions. I think there's about 160 or so if you count both data centers and large data centers. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned, a lot of states have sales and use tax exemptions for data center equipment, 37. And we are one of 4 states where that exemption costs over $1 billion a year. However, as I mentioned, there has been this backlash. And if you go to the next slide, we can sort of look at this a little bit. So in 2026, legislatures around the country and governors as well are responding to the local backlash about data centers. And in 2026, bills have been introduced in 25 states to either end or just limit the sales and use tax exemptions that they have in place. And 6 of them has passed already. And so far, Maine is the only state that has repealed all tax breaks for data centers. But we're seeing a lot of legislative activity on this issue, both in terms of the sales and use tax exemption and just in general. Like a lot of bills, I think it's something like 300 bills have been filed across state legislatures so far just this year in their 2026 sessions to provide more authority for locals, to require more transparency, all that sort of stuff. Okay, here's some policy ideas. We've talked a lot about this stuff. I'm going to well, I'll cover this very briefly, but basically, there are a lot of things you can do here. I mean, the easy one, I think, the easy idea is to simply to end the sales and use tax exemption. But, if that's not palatable for some folks, we could limit it, we could cap it, we could sunset it, or we could tie it to certain other requirements, right? So, we could basically change the law so it says that, okay, if a data center wants a tax exemption or a tax incentive, then they have to agree to certain principles, and we could kind of build those into statute if we wanted to. Also there's a lot of work to be done around establishing and sort of confirming and clarifying local control, local authority over what they can and can't do in regulating data centers. So, as I said, with the backlash, the governor has also responded. So the next slide, we can talk about that a little bit. So basically, the governor, who has been a very, very proactive and a big booster of data centers for his administration, has really changed his tune just in the last couple of months in response to the backlash from folks. And he released a letter to PUC and to ERCOT on June 10th, basically drawing some lines and saying, hey, you guys need to figure out, how data centers can operate to reduce costs for residential ratepayers, are better stewards of the water supply and take into consideration the needs of our neighborhoods. And he sort of, he also kind of added some stuff in his letter about reducing impacts on local communities with some ideas there. He did not call for a moratorium or a pause on development, or he did not clarify, sort of how to figure out what local governments actually have the authority to do, or to maybe give them a little more authority explicitly in statute. That wasn't in there. And it'll be interesting to see as we get closer to session, and especially after we're past the election, how much the governor sticks to some of this stuff and how much some of it sort of goes by the wayside. So I would like to skip ahead as we only have about 10 minutes left. So ERCOT and PUC have responded. They just responded in a letter basically agreeing to cooperate with the governor on the stuff he suggested with respect to, a lot of things around, sort of interconnection to the power grid and making sure that data centers pay for the extra demand that they induce, or that they put onto the grid rather. Yes, why don't we stop there? I was gonna sort of talk a little bit about my testimony, but I think I've pretty much made all the points anyway. I'm gonna be really just saying end the sales and use tax exemption, and then let's get some clarity around the local authority.
Terrific. Thank you, Shannon. We really appreciate that. And yeah, we will circulate slides And then because we are short on time, I'm hoping any of the Q&A, if any of the panelists want to just go ahead and type in the answers to Q&A. But we're going to turn over now to our first training on how to testify to the legislature. And this will be presented by Ian Siemens, the Dallas City Hall advocate for Environment Texas.
Howdy, y'all. Excuse me if I talk like an auctioneer. Gonna try to squeeze this 15-minute presentation into 5 minutes. All right, let's get started. Okay, so briefly, I think most of y'all know the next hearings that y'all are interested in testifying at, so I'm not going to go over this too much. But I know TLO, the Texas Legislature Online, can be a little bit of a beast to figure out, when are the hearings, what is required, and everything. This should give you some good directions on that you can refer to. So you can just refer back to this slide in the future. Also, on the same day of your testimony, once you figure out where you're testifying at, you want to make sure to register ahead of time. So, for most hearings, you'll be registering at a kiosk inside of the Capitol building, near the chambers. And this will be probably in the underground portion of the Capitol with all of the offices and the committee meeting rooms. That process is pretty simple. For some Senate committee hearings, like I've heard apparently one happening this week, you have to submit something in paper to the clerk at the committee meeting room. So be prepared for that, and you can check which one is which at that link there. All right, so some tips. First of all, generally, if you're not wearing a group t-shirt, which if you're in a group, great, y'all should probably collaborate on some t-shirts with a slogan or something related so that you can be clear that this is a big representation of people that are concerned about this issue in the room. Otherwise, I would say business casual up to more formal. I know I've heard from some senators that they don't take people seriously if they don't have a suit and tie on, but I think that's an outlier. Make sure you schedule enough time because these committee meetings can last a long, long time, especially on these hot topics like data centers. You may have to wait in the back of the room. You may be in and out for a few hours waiting for your agenda item to come up. You can find where it's at on the agenda also at Texas Legislature Online. Register. So yes, I already covered that. And then also, some hearings, especially during special sessions, are often only for invited witnesses. So that means you can't just show up, register, start speaking. It's for invited witnesses only. That means that one of those committee members has to invite you. So if you're interested in speaking at one of those, especially if one of those is your representative, your senator, would recommend reaching out to one of their offices, especially someone who might be leaning in your direction on the issue, and see if you can get invited to that hearing, especially if you have expertise or will be directly affected. Okay, so try not to read your testimony word for word, if you can, if you're comfortable. Many people are maybe not as comfortable with public speaking, and it's much easier to just kind of read off. If that's you, that's fine. However, if you can, you can memorize, you can read off of bullet points. That can make it feel a little bit more from the heart, rather than just kind of reading a statement. Mentioning a committee member, that's great if you can do that, if there's something relevant, if you can like respond to perhaps a question that someone had in the hearing, something like that. You can also submit written testimony and handouts. As Cyrus has put in the Q&A, would recommend taking a look at that if you're attending one of the hearings this week. Some of these hearings, they will list, that on all of them, it will list how many copies you need to submit typically. Also at Texas Legislature Online, that same exact link from the first slide. You can find that. Usually try to lean in excess rather than too few, just in case. So have one coming up. Apparently, Cyrus said you're going to have to take 40 copies. Another one is 13. And also invited witnesses, sometimes you can ask with that representative or senator, and you may be able to show slides as well. Okay, composition. So first of all, the most important thing, speak within the time limit. Make sure that you get out what you want to say within 2 minutes, especially if you're going to be stressed and stumbling over your words, aim for shorter than that. You don't want to get cut off before you can ask them to oppose or support the bill. Also, make sure to share your own story. Don't just you read off talking points that someone else has given you. How does this matter to you? How does this relate to you personally? And share that. That, why that personal story aspect, that is what breaks through in those hearings rather than just hearing the same thing that everybody else ahead of you has already said over and over again. Also end with that ask. So ask them to support, oppose, make sure that that is clear, especially if one of those legislators is on their phone doing other things. Make sure that that is clear which side you are speaking on. Okay, and then introduce yourself and your purpose for speaking at the beginning. This is parts of the testimony. You can really break it down into these three portions, almost like an essay: the introduction, the body, tell your story, be personal and specific, and end with that strong closing statement. And then also be prepared because those senators, those representatives may ask you a question about your testimony. They may also just be kind and say, it sounded like you had more to say. It sounded like you were rushed. Do you want to say anything else? So just maybe have that in the back of your mind as well, as if you get another minute or two, what else would you say to them? All right, and I don't think we have time for some examples of testimony, but Cyrus, I saw you're on here. You were one of those, so just wanted to let you know that you're getting an A. And we can move on to Adrian, I think, next, right?
That's right. We got Adrian Shelley, the director of Public Citizens Texas office, and an excellent lobbyist to talk to about lobbying.
Thanks, Luke. We got a lot of good lobbyists here in the room today. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to be quick because we do have just a little bit of time left. But hi, all. I am Adrian Shelley, Text Director of Public Citizen. I hope to see some of y'all at the Capitol tomorrow for the Senate Finance hearing. I am just going to tell you a few more little tips and things. And I think what Ian said was excellent as far as delivering testimony in the hearings themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit more about lobbying outside of that forum, right? So, first of all, lobbying by its very definition is trying to get a lawmaker to do something, right? So the first and last tip that I want to offer is you should always have a very clear ask, something that they can do or not do, commit to doing or not doing. So it's not enough to go in there and say, I don't like the data centers in my community. I need help. You need to say, please tell me, does your boss, the senator, support a proposal to end the state and sales use tax exemption for data centers? And the staffer, because you're going to be talking to a staffer, and we'll get to that, is going to say, oh, well, I'm not sure. I haven't talked to them about it. And then you say, okay, please get back to me. Or can I get back to you in a week and learn the senator's position on this issue? So have a clear ask. Maybe it's please confirm their position. Maybe it's please file this bill for me. Maybe it's sign this letter of support on this issue, but have something that they can do to further your goal. Now, why are you talking to a staffer? Because it's the staffers in the office that do most of the work, right? They're the ones that answer the phone when you come into the door. They're the ones that you're going to talk to, right? You may get an opportunity to speak with a representative, especially if you arrange ahead of time for a meeting and you have a good, compelling reason that makes them want to accept that meeting. But just understand that most of the time you're going to be talking to a staffer. But that's okay, right? Because they're the ones who are really paying attention. They're the ones who have issue area expertise. They're the ones that you want to be talking to. So if you are calling or if you are, in the room and you're talking to a staffer, try to get that person's name. They probably have a business card. They may have a particular issue area that you work on. If you've just gotten to the front desk or you've just gotten to a random staffer who seems like they're an intern or their title is legislative director or something like that, it's okay to ask them, who works this issue? I'm interested in energy policy. Please tell me who works on energy policy in your office. Or your boss is on Senate Finance. Please tell me who the staffer is that works on Senate Finance. And they'll give you a name, maybe a business card, and now you've got the right contact for your next approach. Who are you approaching? Do you stick with your own representative or senator? Are they, because you're a constituent, are they the only ones that want to hear from you? Maybe in some cases. It certainly makes sense to start with your own representative or senator, and it is always good to go into a meeting with a constituent. But you don't need to stop there, right? Tomorrow, we're talking to the members of Senate Finance. Anybody on the Senate Finance Committee probably needs to hear what we have to say. So if you go to an office specifically because they're on a particular committee, that's just fine, right? But again, know why you're going to that particular office. Are they in a position to help you because they're on the committee, because they filed the bill? Know why you are in that office, right? Now, there's a variety of ways to reach out. You can call. All of the offices have a district office and a capital office. Most of them are not staffing their capital offices during the off session. Sometimes they do, but you may want to start with the district office. A lot of them will route the phone from one office to the next, depending on where it is staffed. It's okay to leave a message. You'll usually get a call back. You can also try via email. Everybody in the Texas Capitol has the same email format. It's first name dot last name at House or Senate dot Texas dot gov. So I would be Adrian.Shelley at Senate dot Texas dot gov. I've promoted myself to Senate in this scenario. What I like to do, if I know a staffer, I type out the email address and I put it in quotes and I put it in Google and I search for it. And if I've gotten it right, it pops up in Google because it's on TLO. So that's how I confirm email addresses. Every member in the building, with like one or two exceptions, has the email address first name dot last name at senate.texas.gov. So use those email addresses. Another tip, if I don't know the exact email address, I'll try a couple of addresses and I'll put them all in BCC so they don't see that I'm like trying a bunch of random addresses, right? And hopefully it gets through to them. So you can call, you can email, or you can visit the building. If you're in the building, you're going to see a lot of closed doors around, right? It is okay to just walk in. You don't need to knock on the door. You can just walk in. If there's nobody there, the door is going to be locked. If it's open, you're probably going to see somebody near the front. And again, you just talk to them. You've got your clear ask. You ask them who they are. You try to get a name. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to skip over the portion about testimony because Ian did such a great job. And I'm just going to recap with 4 points. Number one, have a clear ask. What do you want them to do? And follow up. Number two, you're going to be talking to a staffer. Learn who they are. Get the right contact if they're not it. And number three, follow up in writing. And then the final point, number four, yes, the Texas Tribune directory is fabulous. I use it first. Finally, if you are a member of a 501c3, you can probably do a whole lot more lobbying than you think you can. And there are resources out there for you to understand that. Specifically, the Alliance for Justice and their Boulder Advocacy Program is fabulous. They have staffers here in Texas who will talk to you about pushing your 501c3 to the limits of its lobbying power, which again is a great deal. So I know that was quick, but hopefully this empowers you to be lobbyists. And that's what I got to say.
Thank you, Senator Shelley. We appreciate it. All right, that's all we have for tonight. But we have a bunch of events tomorrow. A press conference on data centers on the south steps of the Capitol, I believe, at 9 a.m. Then the hearing for Senate Finance starts at 10:30. We're going to be set up at the Legislative Conference Center. Is that right, Adrian? Yes. So that'll be a place that you in between events you can come and hang out and get further advice. We'll be there to help with that. And then the next webinar is on Tuesday night. And that'll look at water and land use issues. So thank you all. Sorry for running a little bit late, and hopefully we'll see a lot of y'all in person at the Capitol tomorrow. But if you can't be there in person, we've got lots of online or telephone ways, that you can engage as well. So keep an eye out on your email for specific suggestions on how to speak out. Thank you so much.